This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 406 of the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, and for this episode, we are in New Zealand. Joining me again for the podcast, I should say we've had both of these guests on previous podcasts, but since we're all here in New Zealand for Hop Harvest, and my two guests gave presentations together. They're giving other presentations separately for other events down here at Harvest, and have some interesting complementary, but also slightly different takes on impacts on flavor. Anyway, it's Dr. Ron Beatson. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Ron.
Thanks, Jamie.
I mean, American craft beer fans and brewers know you now because Russian River popularized you in particular with a certain beer called Dr. Ron. And so now your brand awareness has just been skyrocketing in the United States.
Oh yeah, we've had some good feedback from that, and had some good the beer we did with Vinny 2 years ago at Russian River was a great day, and I feel very honored that he wanted to name the beer after me.
Absolutely. And also Dr. Tom Shellhammer. Welcome back to the podcast, Tom.
Thanks, Jamie.
We've talked to Tom about Hop Terroir when he released that Hop Terroir study a couple of years ago, but now we get to talk in person, even though that one was remote. Yeah. In this episode, we're going to talk about that Hop Terroir in a New Zealand context. We're going to talk about the importance of genetics in terms of hop type. That is a particular issue for Ron, and then we're also going to talk about the impact of pick window and whatnot, because that's a big issue for Tom, and both have been studying the impacts of these things. Then we'll get into terroir, soil type, etc., because there's some other interesting things there. Obviously, everyone, as this hop market in New Zealand continues to, impact the world, and the farming techniques and the farm locales and, all the other impacts in terms of water, sun, et cetera, start being studied. We learn more and more about what creates interesting flavors, in these New Zealand hops and what that range looks like. And then, how brewers can think about those things. And so that's the point of this episode. We're going to get into it with two very, very smart researchers. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built, offering 24/7 service and support. They build with non-proprietary parts, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. Their in-house engineering crew have been piping breweries, wineries, and distilleries for more than 30 years. They offer free piping design and consultation with the sale of every chiller they build. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. And brewers, what if your yeast could do more than just ferment? With Berkeley Yeast at Can, they bioengineer ordinary strains and make them extraordinary, enhancing the flavors you want and eliminating the ones you don't. Now, in addition to competitive pricing, they're offering free overnight shipping on 5+ barrel pitches. Try it out. If you don't love it, they'll happily refund you. So why settle for ordinary when you can brew with better yeast? Visit berkeleyyeast.com to learn more and start brewing with science on your side. Also, every beer menu could use a refresh button on the fruit flavors. That's why it's time to revisit Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends, where the latest additions include fruit punch, guava, kiwi, and pomegranate. But they aren't stopping there. They welcome flavor suggestions from the brewing industry. More information and free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. Well, I think we've already done like full-on backgrounds in previous episodes, so I don't think we need the full history, of you guys. But Ron, what have you been up to in the last 2 years since we last talked?
I work as a brand ambassador for NZ Hop since retiring from my research job at Plant and Food Research, where I manage the hop research program, and in particular emphasis on plant breeding. And what have I been doing? Flag waving, essentially.
Sure.
So, we're trying to promote our hops internationally, right. And, we've got some unique triploid cultivars, and we're trying to make sure they're maximised in the marketplace.
Tom, you're here on sabbatical. It sounds like a kind of a dream to be able to spend a sabbatical in New Zealand, also looking at and studying and understanding this kind of environment, terroir, growing processes, processing processes, all of those things.
Yeah, correct. I'm here for 4 months, taking a small leave from Oregon State University and just falling in love with New Zealand. So the goal coming here was to really understand what is the New Zealand hop industry. And I feel like, it's not until I travel someplace that I really understand what's going on there, like the culture, the geography, like the distances. You can see it on a map, and I love looking at maps, but like when you're there, it's like, it really makes it like real, and you get a deeper understanding. And so that's what's happening here, like understanding like the complexity of the New Zealand hop industry, kind of the dynamics of that hop industry and the interface with the New Zealand brewers. And then of course, like the culture that's here and how that differs from the US and Europe. And of course the geography and geology around here is pretty amazing. So I feel like envious of the people like Ron who grew up and live here. Like, cause every day I wake up and, you turn a corner, and every time, cause everything's new, right? Cause this is my first time here, and my jaw drops just pretty much every day when I turn a corner on a new highway or someplace. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So it's very, very cool.
It is truly beautiful. And I totally agree with you and it's why we try to get out there and get on the road and go places and see people in person, because what you learn about, even context, this business of beer is all about aroma and flavor and that kind of experience, and understanding how people in places connect with those by what is their context. What are the other things, that are feeding into that? How does the air smell? What do the trees smell like? All of these things kind of impact your baselines for these. And then what things are they eating and drinking? And so that I love just coming places. It's going to sound super weird and just smelling,
I can totally relate to that. I was, after an EBC meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, I took a trip up north to the Speyside region to visit the whiskey region. And I remember walking along the River Spey and smelling the river. And I was like, wow, I can smell that in these whiskeys. And before having ever visited there, I didn't, once you're there, you make this connection, and it's like, it almost seems obvious once you're there. But until you've had that connection, you don't really understand the sense of place, which is kind of interesting from we're going to talk about terroir today, but like whiskey and terroir. I think it exists, but it's surprising given that you have like these raw materials that might have a terroir effect, and then they're grown and then brewed and then fermented and distilled and aged, and that this would still work its way all the way through that process is remarkable.
It is kind of incredible like that. And then, you get to the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and you have that woody, kind of character. You see how that, some of these, people get tuned into the things, the kinds of flavors and aromas of their surroundings. And it's no surprise that the West Coast, with all of its forests, tends to produce forest kinds of notes. And, and so anyway, I think through the course of this, it's going to be interesting to unpack how New Zealand produces hops with such kind of signature kind of characteristics that seem to trend through a number of different varieties. And maybe that's genetics, as Ron says. Maybe there's some terroir impact. Certainly folks talk about the UV rays down here, and but at the same time, there's probably some old wives' tales that are getting told and passed along. And, and so I would love to see, through the course of this, we'll talk about what you have been able to look at as being impactful, maybe some of the things that, maybe misdirections in terms of what some of those impacts are. And we'll try to also, what I love talking about in this is where the flavor range is, because, a lot of brewers, wherever they are in the world, don't have the ability to experience, say, the full range of what a Nelson Sauvin might be able to express, as you can if you're here and get to experience lots and lots of those lots of, of Nelson Sauvin. So, And anyway, we'll try to kind of unpack that so that folks can build us, some more flavor ideas, help build some of their language for describing some of these flavors. And because, as a brewer is selecting hops and evaluating what they can do with it, having that kind of mental language for what it is that they're looking for and what they're trying to achieve can be pretty useful. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a sec. But first, taste the modern flavors of indie hops at CBC this year in Indianapolis. Join Indie and Indie for 14 incredible collab beers to showcase Strata, Luminosa, Lorien, Audacia, Meridian, and more. Experience their newest hop, Audacia, in both a hazy IPA by Fidens and a West Coast IPA by Grains of Wrath. Dive the depths of Strata in T90, CGX, and Hyperboost forms with IPAs by Craft Coast and Flatland Brewing. Refresh your palate with the crisp, summery flavors of Lorien and an Italian Pils by Maui Brewing and a French Pils by Upright Brewing, and bask in the liquid sunshine magic of Luminosa with IPAs from Fort George and Baerlick Brewing. Check out the full CBC beer lineup at www.indiehops.com and plan to stop by their booth number 3122. They'll be as happy to see you as you'll be that you made the effort. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And upgrade your fermentation game with Unitank 2.0 from SS Brewtech, featuring a laser-welded cooling jacket for efficient and precise temperature control, an innovative silicone racking arm, and a carbonation stone that lets you carbonate right in the fermenter. Unitank 2.0 is engineered to help you get the most out of your fermentations. Available from 7-gallon up to 1-barrel sizes, Unitank 2.0 will be right at home in your homebrew setup or producing pilot batches at your commercial brewery. Visit ssbrewtech.com to learn more. All right, Ron, you guys gave a presentation on Monday, and why don't you kind of fill us in on what the kind of core outline, for what you all were presenting on was?
Well, it covered quite a field.
We're going to try to recreate it right here on the podcast if we can.
Yeah. There was a lot of emphasis on the terroir of New Zealand hops, and also a little bit about the genetics as well, of course. And just a background, from my perspective, we talked about the Bract series of hops we've got, which is the sort of the pathway to market for the co-op, the NZ Hops co-op. That's basically taking the products from the Plant and Food Joint Research Program we've got with between New Zealand Hops and Plant and Food Research, and it's taking those and it's sort of like a pre-commercial testing, if you like, of selections. Sure. So that was pretty much, and we talked a lot about the effects of environment and locality down here in New Zealand, and in fact, we haven't got any major pest and diseases here, so we don't have to worry about canopy sprays on the crop. And yeah, that's pretty much, I think, what we talked about.
Yeah, Tom, you guys set up a hierarchy of I mean, obviously there's some some differing perspectives on these, and but in terms of impacts on hop flavors and aromas within this New Zealand context, how do you outline the most important to the least important impacts on that?
That'd be interesting to hear, like the two of us kind of go at that, right? So I'll give you my sense. So first and foremost is hop variety, right? So you can't take a Fuggle and somehow with brewing skill turn it into a Nectaron, right? So the genetics are going to result in a aroma profile that has maybe not hard guardrails, but it's going to provide a certain realm of flavors. And I think that's pretty intuitive to folks. Same thing on wine grapes. You're not going to you can make a cab and a Pinot Noir and kind of play with different sort of fermentation management strategies, but they're never going to end up being the same wine. So that's kind of first
until
and
they
foremost.
develop a GMO yeast
exactly.
that does all of that for you.
Yep.
Exactly.
And then I would say, then just like the next one is between like terroir and maturity. Those are kind of the two things that I see have an impact. And I suppose maturity kind of gets lumped into agronomics, like how the grower is managing their field. I think on a gross perspective, like stepping back globally, I think terroir is going to have a pretty big impact. Take, for example, Cascade grown in Germany, Cascade grown in North America, Cascade grown in New Zealand. There's going to be pretty different expressions of Cascade. again, the growing region is not going to turn a Cascade into an entirely different hop profile, but they're going to be pretty different. That's not going to be difficult for you if you had 3 piles of hops and you were smelling them to say, oh yeah, those are different, as opposed to they seem really nuanced. But let's say we stay within one of those regions, like New Zealand or North America. Then like there's this question around terroir, which is basically the sense of place that is expressed in the agricultural product, in this case hops. I think those terroir differences are I say relatively subtle. So we were doing some terroir work between the Willamette Valley, not between, but looking at Cascade hops and Mosaic hops grown in the Willamette Valley and grown in the Yakima Valley. And we had kind of a balanced design, roughly 10 different farms in each of those. Maybe it's called 10 different locations. We had roughly 25 different farms participating. And what we found is there was a pretty measurable difference between Yakima Valley and Willamette Valley, but there was also a pretty measurable difference within each of those valleys. And that the magnitude of that difference within was about the same order as the magnitude of differences between, right? So it doesn't mean that Yakima grown Cascade is just distinctly different than Oregon Cascade. Kind of depends upon where you're getting it within those each regions. And so I think the same thing will happen here. So you can find different expressions of Nelson Sauvin based upon where it's grown in the northern part of the South Island. The area is pretty compact here. What, 45 kilometers, kind of circle-ish.
Probably, 50 kilometers.
40, 50 K. So it's not, the distances are not that big. I think there's really strong microclimates here because it's very different than Yakima. There's microclimates in Yakima, but here, like you go up, some of these hops are grown in like distinct separate valleys. So anyway, the next level then would be like the agronomics, and I think the big key there is like picking window and when a grower wants to pick those hops. If you're looking within, let's say, New Zealand or within North America, or maybe not North America, within Willamette Valley, that picking decision has a bigger effect, in my opinion, than the terroir effect. And we haven't like done a true terroir versus maturity. It's just like the different projects that are going on, and it feels like the swing in aromatic expression of a hops throughout the growing season is much, much bigger than what I've seen from like a terroir perspective. Maybe not much, but it's bigger. And so, an early picked variety and a late picked variety might have very different kinds of aromatic profiles. And one of the things that we've been looking at kind of indirectly is the presence of this onion garlic aroma that comes with late picked varieties. And it's not all late picked varieties. It's like late picked Cascade doesn't really have a lot of this OG onion garlic expression. But hop varieties that have a strong thiol character to them, these thiol compounds are sulfur-based. And so like the tropical aromas, those are many times coming from these thiol compounds. The onion garlic aromas, those are also sulfur-based compounds. And they're not the same kind of thiols, but there are thiols. So it's not entirely surprising to see like the progression of thiol development in, let's say, a variety like Citra, also then coincides with the expression of this onion garlic characteristic, particularly with late-picked Citra or late-picked Mosaic or late-picked Simcoe, but not late-picked Cascade or late-picked Willamette. And so that can really be a big dial or big lever, right? That a grower can pick, and with it, and so like dank cannabis aroma is not the same as onion garlic aroma, but like for brewers that want like dank smelling hops, I think harvest maturity has an impact there. That an early picked variety is going to tend to be less of this dank character, and late picked is going to have more of that dank character if that variety is going to express dankness. Like you're not going to find dank Willamette, but you can certainly find some dank Simcoe or dank Mosaic. I
was talking to a brewer the other day, and they mentioned that one of the hops, I can't remember which now, actually went on this almost like OG curve, or was actually on the earlier side, had more OG expression.
Oh, no kidding.
And then hits its fruit kind of peak, and then dives back into some of that OG expression. And so some of this may not even be purely linear. It may move in multiple axes given any time, just to make things even more complex. So
I'd be surprised if it was OG was early, but that may be their definition of OG.
Sure.
Because a lot of it's subjective, isn't it? So it's,
I agree.
It's actually what we term, we don't use the term dank really here in New Zealand, and we don't use the term diesel yet. That they're quite common descriptors
in North America.
In North America, and so it's often interesting for us to hear those comments from brewers from the States. So I think I agree with you. That some of our cultivars are high thiol, like Nectaron and Nelson Sauvin. So they probably tend to have OG when they're overripe. And we can probably go out and find some now, Tom, if we wanted to.
Yeah, we're kind of getting to the end of the season here.
It is. So in fact, when we leave this podcast, we're going to go visit a farm which has got, he's harvesting Nectaron. So it'll be interesting to smell those. I think it'll be perfect. Yeah. It's about the perfect season for Nectaron.
They were harvesting some Nectaron yesterday when I was at a farm, and got to see it coming off. That's great. So you generally agree with Tom and these impacts, and the kind of varying scales. I know you're team genetics, Ron.
Yeah, well, we've done a lot of work on obviously characteristics of our hop cultivars, and part of that studies has been to look at it over the years, the build up of various compounds, and through the terpenes and other compounds in the hops, and when we do the analysis on it we did a study over 10 years, and by far the most dominant feature, regardless of season or the area it's grown here in the Nelson province, has been genetics. And the other ones do have influences, yes, correct, but if you wanted to define a particular hop, it's always about the genetics, and that was really part of the study anyway. Was we wanted to have a key, if you like, for various cultivars. So, like, what is the key compounds that stand out for each particular cultivar? So that's what we did the study for, and initially, but it was just interesting for us that genetics was by far and away the most important.
If I recall, this we spent. Ron and I have been spent a few times riding around the valleys in a car together as he's been showing me different hop farms, and we have these different discussions. And I think this is one of the ones around kind of like a true to type, or
correct.
Let's call it cultivar or genetic purity.
That's right.
Being able to understand. It's really cool. Like basically looking at different genetics, understanding what the essential oil profile is, and then using some interesting multivariate statistics to be able to identify what are the key elements and when a variety is in like that target or not, right? So you could use it from a not that it would be like an adulteration, but it gives you a sense on, like, if you had a hop variety, is it really the variety that you want? You could certainly do that with a genetic test, but you could, in this case, do it also with an essential oil characterization.
Yes, and you could do it on the spot, whereas some of the molecular side of things you've pre-planted, if you like, and whereas the way it's like basically having a key for all our different cultivars, and so that's the important thing for us, is to make sure that we've got, as you say, the purity of each cultivar is if we got a Rewalker, we want to make sure it is Rewalker. And
what are the factors that impact that drift from that true to type?
What are the factors?
Yeah,
I think there's a bunch. I mean, some are like just in like maybe a genetic drift or whatnot, but there can also be unintentional things, like when people clear out a field. If they don't clear out the field enough, you can have like off types. Well, we call them off types. Right. They're just like the old cultivar that was there beforehand that didn't get completely cleaned out. So now you've got like this background level, low or maybe medium level, depending upon how efficiently the field was cleaned out. Or maybe someone's propagated something that they thought was one variety, and they actually grabbed the wrong material and made an honest mistake of like what they're propagating. These are some examples that might have happened.
Hop age, does plant age have some impact on that?
Yes, it does a little bit. Age of plant certainly does. And but yeah, you're right, Tom. It's a lot of it's just about making sure that the field is, if it's Rewalker, making sure it is Rewalker, or whatever the cultivar happened to be. So it's I guess it's just a check, if you like, and we do quite a lot of purity checks in the co-op with when the samples come through to the warehouse. They've all been they have a good thorough going over, if you like, in terms of their hop quality. So which includes is it typical of that particular cultivar, and if it's not, well, then the alarm bells start ringing. But that is very, very rare, I might add.
Yeah, I think in talking with George, you're the quality fellow at NZ Hops, there's examples of that where it's just like a mislabeling. Like something comes through and you're expecting Riwaka and like, man, it just doesn't really smell like Riwaka. And people are scratching their heads. So it's like it's clearly out of type. And then, you do some background checking and be like, oh, in fact, it's not Riwaka. It's like it was a mislabeled bale or something like that. Yeah.
It's also a check on, as an aside, it's also a check on when the hops are harvested too. Like we talked before about early, medium, and late harvested hop cultivars, and so is it in the spec for that particular cultivar? And sometimes the aromas are not what we expect from that particular cultivar. And usually you go back and find out, oh gosh, they harvested it fairly early, so there must have been a reason for that, and or late, as the case may be. So it's this season is a wee bit different because the production in New Zealand is this because of the world glut on hops, if you like. It's the growers are not growing all their particular areas of hops, so they're becoming a lot more attuned to picking them at the right time, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a little easier to pick them on time
exactly.
when you're.
I think that's the upside. If there is an upside of having an oversupply of hops and a pullback from the industry on acreage and the amount of material that's strung and harvested, is that the hop quality should go up, right? Because the growers are not necessarily constrained on picking capacity or drying capacity because there's less hops being grown.
Right. This is not a 24-hour harvesting operation here now.
No.
And in fact, one grower I was talking to yesterday was talking, they're not harvesting some that they've even planted potentially just because they don't want to process and have excess supply there. But then it allows that grower to be pretty selective about what they harvest, and they're only going to harvest their, what they think are the best and the most expressive. And so there's a benefit there. I mean, true to type is such an interesting thing. It's almost, we're just kind of, we're picking out the middle of the bell curve, right? There's always outliers, but, in terms of something like Nelson Sauvin, what are those kind of rails? Where are the edges of that bell curve? That's what's normal. How different are they, on both of those edges? Is this a really tight curve where most of it is, just in this sweet spot and the little edges of those bell curves are really, really small with a big middle? Or, what is this kind of range of variety that the hop expresses?
Well, Nelson Sauvin's been around for over 20 years now. It was actually released in 2000, so it's been around for a wee while. So, and I guess as we go along, we're learning how to grow it better and better. And the growers, I've noticed a big change in the last 5 or 6 years in terms of their quality, and they're a lot more aware now of when to pick the thing right, if that's the question. We're looking for those aromas that Nelson Sauvin's got. It's got a citrus element to it, but it's also got a lot of passion fruit and other traits like the Sauvignon Blanc wine grape aromas to it as well. So it's you're just trying to pick out the best of those. So the growers are getting a lot better at when to pick it, and it's a cultivar which can go off quick at the end. So they have to make sure that they harvest at the right time. So there's a lot of emphasis on Nelson Sauvin to pick it at the right time. And
so it's slow, fast. You don't want to be picking it on the green side. You're going to get all those herbaceous flavors to it. So, but the sweet spot is usually it's about now. In fact, about the 20th of March is a good time to be harvesting, plus or minus a few days, and that's where the terroir effect comes in. It's what the growers have used in terms of their composting of their paddocks with the with the manures and things, and also the sheep cleaning off the bottoms of the vines.
Indeed.
It's amazing. Your hop fields are so clean here.
Yes. It's and there's been a big change, I think, in the whole management of the agronomics, if you like, of the plant. There's a lot less cultivation done here than what I've seen overseas as well. There's a lot of canopy, lots of grass and other plants that are purposely sown into the fields to give the soil structure a lot increase
Yeah,
increase the
understood.
value of the soil structure and more organic matter going into the soil and stuff. So it's there's a lot
The
of
cover crop and regenerative planting has just been
correct.
the normal way that things have been done
Exactly.
here for.
It's what people are focusing on now in North America, and growers there, I think, are starting to turn their attention to it. But the New Zealand growers have been doing it for quite a while here. It's just
Yeah,
common to have cover
that's-
crops here. They don't, and if you're going to be using sheep as kind of your weed management, not 100%, but like throughout the
Right.
growing season, then you kind of approach it differently. You don't like do heavy tilling, and because the
No.
animals are coming in to graze,
Yeah.
and the byproduct is that they also graze the lower, not quite 1 meter bottom of the plant structure, and which is what a grower would do anyway, where they would do some sort of chemical burn back or maybe manual cutting back, just to make sure that there's not a lot of architecture for insects and disease to move up into the canopy. So it's a standard practice to come back and make sure that the base of the hop yard, like around
Right.
each crown, is cleaned off. And here they did do it with sheep, and it's quite amazing. You look through the field and there's this firm line of everything is very open, below that,
Right.
and it's just sheep dependent, right?
And super cleaned out. The sheep do
Yes,
an excellent job.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and they really like hop leaves as well. So
Yeah.
they don't like hops themselves, but they love hop leaves. So and they'll actually climb up the plant a little bit too, with their front legs to reach the higher
Yeah.
leaves to trim off. And so, it's been a good practice, I think, and it's something we've grown up with. So they've been using sheep for as long as I can remember. And
I want to circle back to the you're talking about like the guardrails and
Yeah.
like the characteristic of particular varieties. One thing that I've realized in working with either the maturity or terroir studies and talking with brewers and just observing what goes on like with hop selection is that for each hop variety there isn't one archetype of that variety, and it's really narrow, and everything that sits outside that is somehow inferior. Like you've got growers. We talked a little bit about dank cannabis kind of aroma in some varieties. So let's take Mosaic as an example. I think there's some brewers that really want that, and there's some brewers that really don't want that. And so that from let's call it that bell-shaped curve you talked about of the aroma expression, it widens it a lot, or maybe it's multiple bell-shaped curves in there. And so you've got some brewers that really want fruity, citrusy, tropical expressed Mosaic. Others want that, but plus dank, or maybe even late pick the kind of this diesel aroma, or maybe even some OG character to it, which I think is great because then it broadens the appeal and the potential marketability of these hops. And if everything was like, if everybody wanted just one really narrow slice of that, then that would be a challenge. You'd have like.
And how boring would that be if
exactly.
everybody wanted this same monolithic kind of thing?
Yeah.
No, and I've had conversations with grape brewers who talk about it. In fact, Justin at Ghost Town was on that. It's like, we need, something, you need some of that extra edge in the hops. Fruit's great, but like all fruit and none of that, that edge just isn't going to give them what they want in their beer. And, and so I think, that's a great way to talk about it. I want to maybe talk about what diesel is, because before we started the podcast, Ron mentioned that like, that's just not in your vocabulary. You just don't, here in New Zealand, you don't talk about hops as having that kind of character, but it's something very common for us in the United States to talk about, I think you've got some ideas, Tom, about where some of that origin might be, and have been working on how also that connects to cannabis, which, has some commonalities there. And you've done some studies on that. Maybe we'll talk about that for a second, but first, did you know that Isuzu trucks have been the best-selling low cab-forward trucks in America every year since 1986? That's right, for more than 38 years. The legendary durability, remarkable performance, and low cost of ownership of Isuzu trucks have made them a favorite for work truck owners. You may have seen their ultimate craft beer truck that debuted at the Craft Brewers Conference in 2019, and it's been there every year since. As members of the Brewers Association, they've partnered with breweries, suppliers, and distributors alike to support the craft beer industry. Whether you're looking for a self-distribution solution or one to deliver supplies, there's an Isuzu truck that'll fit your needs. Go to IsuzuCV.com to check out their impressive lineup, or visit an Isuzu dealer today to find out why now more than ever, Isuzu trucks are the trucks you trust for the work you do. And protecting your beer's highest quality is crucial to maintain its unique taste and prevent spoilage organisms, and microbiological testing plays a vital role in this process. Sativa offers a comprehensive portfolio of laboratory filtration products designed for both lab and production floor use. Their products are portable, affordable, and suitable for any size craft brewing operation, and they support a wide range of applications, including microbiology analysis to detect spoilage organisms during manufacturing through final product release, and shelf life studies, general filtration for degassing and yeast removal, and analytical chemical analysis of raw materials and final products. Discover how Sativa can help you protect the quality of your beer today. Visit beerandbrewing.com/Sativa. That's CYTIVA to learn more. Also, if you're launching a brewery or acquiring an existing one, consider our brewery workshop and new brewery accelerator September 14th through 17th in Fort Collins, Colorado. Over 4 days, we engage in panel discussions, technical brewery tours, networking, and small working group sessions that help you better understand and prepare for the challenges of brewery operation. Tickets are on sale now. Visit breweryworkshop.com for more information and to secure your spot. Tom, talk to me about diesel.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
you've been studying this both in hops and in cannabis, and trying to understand what some of the kind of core components are of this, precursors, formation, etc. And as we taste all sorts of beers, New Zealand Pilsner here, obviously pale ales and IPA, there is a pretty, for us, it seems like there's that kind of line and edge that is pretty common across multiple hop varieties here in New Zealand that have some of that kind of expression. And it's neither good nor bad. It just is. But what do you think? How can you trace some of this back? And do you have an idea of what it is?
that's a good question. So
It's all about genetics.
genetics, exactly. I think one of the challenges, I don't want to disappoint you, we haven't done specifically focused on diesel, but we've been doing work looking at trying to understand what the breadth of characteristics of both hemp and cannabis. And it's been a really interesting project because it parallels a lot of what we do in hops. And as we look at developing that language and we talk to people within the cannabis industry, these are folks that are buyers for dispensaries in Oregon, as well as people that are hemp and cannabis breeders and growers. We kind of hear the language that people use. And there's a lot of overlap with hops, but then there's some of these other things that are unique, and like diesel and fuel, which is not just specific diesel, but kind of this sort of gasoline, but not necessarily solvent kind of aroma, is part of that cannabis lexicon. And I've heard people within the hop realm use that as well. In our lab, we'll use that sometimes as well. When, like, for instance, this Terroir study we had looking at mosaic, that descriptor would come up on occasion as like the mosaic as it gets, in my opinion, as it starts getting later and later, it starts moving into this OG character, but it can also take on these fuel-like characters that's layered on top of.
Thomas, do you think it's a terpene-based compound?
I don't know if it's terpene or maybe an interaction between terpene and sulfur. But we haven't done enough of a dive to try to really pinpoint, okay, what is diesel? What are the potential compounds that might be driving that aroma? So that's going to be a little bit disappointing for you and your listeners. So I don't have this is what you need to hunt. But I do feel like the varieties that tend to have more thiol-driven aroma, and so for your listeners, thiols are these are these sulfur compounds that are really characteristically found in things like Citra, Simcoe Mosaic, Nectaron, Nelson Sauvin. There's a whole broad range of different thiols, but there's a subset of those that are really important for tropical fruity aroma in beer. And they're sulfur-based, and associated with that are some of these other sulfur compounds. We talked a little bit about OG before one of the breaks, and I think diesel may play in there as well. I don't think it's straight up terpene, but I do think that there's a really interesting interaction between the terpene fraction and the non-terpene fraction that really drives hop aroma. So I think oftentimes you kind of mistakenly view one or two compounds as like the key compound. For 10 years, maybe 20 years ago, it was like linalool. It was like everybody was focused on linalool. And then there was a kind of interest in geraniol. These are both very important compounds, but by themselves, you look at, let's say, Berkeley Yeast came out with a yeast that was really promoting a lot of linalool and geraniol aroma. It isn't like uniquely hoppy. It's just really strong in linalool and geraniol. And then we kind of turned our attention the last few years on thiols.
There are monoterpene, products where you can just experience
dose
any of those.
Right.
And I just did some of that a couple weeks ago with rep for one company. And it's amazing how when you single out any one of these, how unimpactful any one individually is.
I think there's like a strong synergy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And same thing now with thiols. People are really like not perseverating, but are finding all kinds of fascination with thiols. And they're extremely potent compounds, like very, very small amounts, like nanogram per liter, give you like signature aromas. Same thing with, then you've got GM yeast that are cranking out these thiols, and it can really move that beer into just a thiol predominant beer, which to me smells and tastes a lot like just passion fruit juice or guava juice. And so I think it's this interplay between these potent compounds, some of these key ones, and how they work together that drive unique flavors. And I think diesel may be part of that. That's a very long answer to.
Yeah, I mean, mapping that out with, a GC mass spec is just this insane multivariate equation to understand, how, and not even with the GC mass spec, because some of these styles you're talking about are need much more sensitive.
We actually use GC mass spec. We use something called a triple quad mass spectrometer. So it's a way that allows us to understand and hunt for specific mass fragments at very, very low levels. So you need that. So you need really advanced instrumentation because they're very trace compounds. And then you also need lots of samples because you need to see sort of genetic diversity in order to get an understanding of what is the background noise and where is the signal. Yeah, and then you need a lot of noses. Right, to be able to say,
this masking and amplifying effect and how these work in such, small trace amounts, and understanding how the difference in those things. I mean, there's still an immense amount of mathematical and analytical work to be done.
Yeah, it's fun. As a scientist, it's like, it's cool space to play in.
Sure. Ron, you guys don't think about diesel, but how do you all describe that kind of edge, aroma, flavor that New Zealand hops tend to have as a character?
I guess it's probably terpene type compounds. That's how I interpret it personally. But it's a very difficult subject to talk about because, as Tom says, it's a very complex topic, if you like. The aromas of various hop cultivars and also the beers that they end up in. So it's a continuum, really. And I would describe them as more, I guess, terpene based. But whether they are or not is another story. It's the way I perceive them, and that's diesel for me.
How do you describe? Do you not? I mean, I could also think about that as fresh. There's a fresh character to it, or just sulfury. I would say that there are certain coffees that express with some of the similar notes. To me, especially if they're just being ground, and I can catch some of those interesting sulfur compounds, and when I smell it, I'm like, oh, that smells a lot like this, kind of diesel hop kind of character, or this and I'm sure that's just some of those sulfur compounds coming out. But how do you think about it in a sensorial way? Because for us, when I come down here, if I have a West Coast Pilsner in the United States, with a Citra mosaic, and I have a New Zealand Pilsner down here, like it has more there is this kind of sharper, more minerally kind of character.
Yeah, that's what I was really meaning. That's what I described as terpene. So maybe it is sharper, more minerally. I think a lot of our pilsners in particular are quite citrusy. So that's another characteristic, if you like, of our hops. So,
it'd be interesting to see what people describe as New Zealand character, because it's like we probably have our own interpretations of it. But I would see that, like, my take on it is that they tend to be very fruit forward.
Yes.
They tend to be tropical, tend to be less like piney, herbaceous. And so they play really well, like these hop varieties play really well in hop forward beers, particularly hazy IPAs and standard IPAs. And I think the New Zealand Pils, that's kind of an interesting thing talking to different brewers. A New Zealand Pils doesn't necessarily have to be a lager. right? It can be an ale,
Right.
right? It's like fruit forward ale. Like, oh, I didn't realize that. In some cases, it's a lager. So there's like kind of this mishmash of styles and interpretation. It's the same thing like in the U.S. right now. Well, at least last year, everybody was all hot on Japanese lager. I'm like, well, I asked the person, what is Japanese lager? Well, it's made with rice. And so I'm like, oh, so Budweiser is a Japanese lager? Like, no, Budweiser is not a Japanese lager, but it's made with rice. And so it's like this.
It's made with rice syrup, but yes.
It's like this interesting,
Sure.
It's the thing that the consumer is fascinated with, and then brewers are attacking it from different approaches. So the same thing here, like with the New Zealand pills. It may or may not be a pills. And like a cold IPA may not necessarily be cold IPA. It can be like a dry hop lager, right? So
yeah. How much? One of the interesting things, about both hops and even grapes. We're sitting here on a winery, at our Airbnb recording this, is that stress conditions tend to create a lot of plant response, and can create some, more intensity or more volume of some of these characteristics that most of us enjoy in some of these hops. How does that kind of stress response and the conditions here in differing growing areas impact some of that expression? And with some of the research that you all have done, to make it more complex, there's terroir, but then every growing season's a little bit different. Sunshine, rain, wind hits at different times. During the growing season, we just had rain earlier this week in the middle of harvest, which will may reflect some way somehow, and in some of these things. Last year was a very dry year, and that kind of stress from reports of most of the growers that it produced some really great hops because they just had a strong character to them. How does that that plant stress and then the varying growing conditions over the year impact things?
Well, that's very, very complex subject to deal with. I do believe that we've got very high UV levels compared with most other hop growing areas, I believe, and that's got to be playing a part in the uniqueness of our aromas too. So that's changing the plants biochemically.
Yeah.
What those compounds are is it'd be a great research topic, I believe. But you could be doing. I guess you could do some of those studies in environment controlled laboratories and things. But I believe that we get a lot. Our summer months are quite high in UV, obviously, and the sky is very clear. So I think that's having a major impact on the outcome of our cultivars in terms of each season. And this year has been, I think, has been one of the better Februaries we've had in leading up to harvest. So it's been nice and clear days and lots of sunshine. So that's impacting on the aromas as well. So it's not just UV.
Cloudy December, but then things got better in January and February.
Yeah, yes, we had a lot of rain leading up to Christmas time, and then flowering occurs about Christmas time to end of January, and that was. It started off being a bit murky, if you like, cloudy in January, but it's from mid-January onwards. It's been great, great weather for hop growing. I believe it's going to add to the aromas and things of the hops for this year. It's going to be a good season in terms of the overall aromas of that are coming forth in the hops.
But I would expect you to say that, Ron.
Would you? You think I'm biased?
You're a cheerleader. I get it.
So like these aromatic compounds, most people believe them. They're basically like plant response systems, and in some cases like signaling systems as plants talk to each other. If they're under stress, then it's like a way to either try to have a biocontrol against that stress, or as a signaling agent to communicate with other plants about the stress. So talk to many breeders, and they think a stress is good from a expression of the essential oil, whatever expression, and kind of just a little circular there. But the things that I find unique about the New Zealand space is that you mentioned it very briefly at the beginning of this show. There's no fungal diseases here. And I'm not sure if brewers or consumers really understand that. Like in North America and in Europe, there's lots and lots of sprays that go on hops to try to keep that disease pressure in check. Otherwise, they have really problems with yield and quality. There's some
Also why we grow a lot of hops in the desert.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But it's
to-
really moist, and then fungal disease just goes crazy, right? And you don't see people doing overhead irrigation in North America because they have fungal disease. Here,
I saw sprinklers yesterday in hop fields. Like, what? No one who does that. No one in the United States has giant sprinklers running.
No, because you just like setting yourself up for fungal
Right.
disease. But there's no fungal disease here, so there's no spraying, which I think is a really cool thing. That's like an untapped opportunity, I think, for the New Zealand industry to kind of leverage the fact that there's very little to no canopy sprays. And so that kind of presents like an interesting, I thought we were having a conversation, another one of our drives, like, okay, what is it that really drives big differences in New Zealand hops? You look at like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, everybody like points to that. Okay, there's some big thiol bombs. And when you look at the precursor level of Sauvignon Blanc juice, of juice produced in the Marlborough region versus juice that's produced in France versus juice that's produced in North America, the thiol precursor level is off the chart in New Zealand. So that's kind of definitely a terroir element. And I think the same thing is happening with hops as well. And so that's like kind of, what is it? I think maybe it's UV, right? We thought that's kind of, you've heard Ron say this, it's got to be UV. That would be an interesting study to carry out. And the fact that there's no fungal disease, I wonder how that impacts this. Because maybe in some cases a little fungal disease is not bad from an aromatic perspective. So
there's also been some talk lately, like we're working on disease-free Citra variety that they found actually didn't express very well. Some brewers have been talking about it, and growers have been talking about that even as you try to develop a plant that can resist that stress, it actually isn't very beneficial in that sense. I'll have to get some more details on that. But
I think Ron's job and Kerry's job is to like develop new varieties for New Zealand. They're not trying to create varieties that are global, right? And so I think it's this interaction between the genetics that are coming out of the breeding program and how that they interplay with the growing region. So, and we've seen that with other, like for many years, I think breeders were trying to find replacement varieties for German varieties because many beers back in like the 50s, 60s, 70s were just yellow lager beers that were inspired by German lager beers.
Sure.
And so the local brewers are, okay, well, give me like a Hallertau or a Satz replacement that's grown here. And I think that's kind of the cool
hops
thing.
Farms here were just growing hops for global macro brewers.
Commodity hops, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Commodity hops with an eye trying to create, similar kind of German aromas, because if you just try to take Hallertau and bring it here and grow it, it doesn't do great outside that that area. And so your hops are designed for New Zealand.
Yeah, we certainly have used German and English hops and American hops too, sort of in the background of our crosses. But yeah, you're right. It's I guess it's New Zealand ink aromas and flavors, and that's our claim to fame. Hops are the difference. We don't want to be producing hops that are like any other country. We want to be producing hops that are going to be able to we can take to the world and promote. So
sure.
And that's I find this topic it's often difficult for me to describe the true aromas of the hop cultivars, but we certainly they're unique. There's no doubt about that, and I think it's got that basis of genetics in it, and but that has got some terroir in there as well. And I think going forward, I think there's a lot more emphasis now on the aromas and flavours of our selections as they're coming through. Like 30 years ago, it was about alphas. And as you said, Tom, it's producing hops that have got particular characteristics that fit into a global lager or whatever it happened to be. But now we've got, as we've described, we've got New Zealand styles coming into and I think that's the result of the breeding program and the fact that we've got these unique aromas, if you like, New Zealand ink aromas, I'll call it that. And so that's good for us. And the hops that are produced here are 85% is exported now. So it's I think we're filling a gap, if you like. And one thing I do like about the New Zealand hops that we've heard from American brewers in particular has been the fact that they play well with other cultivars like Citra and Nectaron. Those sort of combinations have been really quite good.
Sure.
And if you talk with somebody like Vinny from Russian River, he's a great fan of Nectaron, but he's also a great fan of Citron, obviously. So, he's doing a lot of work in the background on.
And a really big fan of Brewer's Gold.
Oh yeah. And so there's lots of good feedback we're getting from, and to be quite honest, we're producing less than 2% of the world's hops, so we're not going to exactly threaten the world with our hop production, but we can fill an important part of the overall balance.
Yeah,
I think if people want to use New Zealand hops in their beers, which we hope they do.
Yeah, I think that's really like one reason why I'm here for the sabbatical. It's like here's a region in the world that produces less than 2% of the world's hops, but yet there are style definitions that start with NZ, New Zealand IPA, New Zealand pills. It's like, wow, how? So there's something clearly unique about the New Zealand hop industry and the New Zealand hop genetics that result in signature styles that you don't see from other parts of the world.
Well, I think it's also the fact that we've been, we are fairly remote to the rest of the hop growing world in terms of our production. So, in Southern Hemisphere, it adds to it as well. But we've followed our own pathway in terms of the development of these cultivars too. We've used a lot of European material for like Fuggles and Goldings and those types, but we've also used Lake Cluster from the Americas, which has been, and both those two have been a very strong background in all our hop cultivars. So it's the combination. It's a bit of a lolly scramble when you're doing the crosses, of course. So you end up with all these range of flavours which we've got.
It would be interesting for you to explain a little bit about some of the unique elements of the breeding program in New Zealand, because it's like it's all sort of triploid based, not exclusively, but how many other breeding programs focus so heavily on triploid varietal development?
No, some have done, but
so maybe just explain to the listener, like, what is a diploid, what is a tetraploid, what's a triploid? Because when you if you can do that in lay terms, because I think that's interesting. And then what's the benefit? Why do the triploid? So that's
initially the program here in New Zealand was to produce diploids after the Second World War when the program was started. So the program is 80 years old. The plant breeding program, and it's had inputs from the industry, both the brewers and the growers here, as well as the government here. And after a while they realised, well, okay, we've got these great diploids, but
and what is a diploid? Just so that
diploid is the normal chromosome number, if you like, of
two chromosomes.
Yeah, well, that's 20 chromosomes, but you got two sets, two pairs. So that's the normal chromosome number. So the triploids have got 30 chromosomes. So so when you're crossing to produce a triploid, you've got to have a tetraploid, or one with 4 sets of chromosomes, and one with you have to cross it to a diploid, which has got 2 sets. So you can imagine that 2 cross 4, you get 3, and when it comes to flowering time, the plants don't set seed. Basically, that's the idea of triploids, is that they're seedless. More by definition, they're seedless.
So even if they're male plants in the field, these triploids should not be producing any seeds.
Very little.
Yep.
Very little seeds. So I think the definition of seedless is less than 2% of the weight of the cone. So that's the theory, and it's the benefit for us is the fact that we've developed these populations, if you like, of parents that have got, they're unique to New Zealand for a start. We've probably got the best collection of tetraploid material in the world in terms of the genetics, if you like, using it as parents. And so the idea is that we can produce a range of compounds, a range of selections, if you like, coming through the program by using by producing triploids. So, but to do that, it's actually not that simple. You've got to actually produce a population of diploids, and you've got to produce populations of tetraploids. So you end up with these seedless triploids. So I don't know whether that's explaining it very well.
No, I think that's good, because it's a unique approach. It's not like so unique as to be rare, but it's an interesting.
No, we're just using
driver of trying to produce a population of plants that are going to be generally seedless.
Yeah.
And And then the trick to getting there, as you said, is having a decent breeding colony of diploids and tetraploids.
Correct, and they can be either male or females as well. So, so that's the other factor. We've used the tetraploids as both males and females, and so that's the other uniqueness about the program too. In other words, you can use parents from the world collection for diploids, and you can cross it. You can cross them with males that are tetraploid, and come up with some unique products. And so, some of the cultivars we've released recently, for instance, Superdelic, is that way. It's a diploid. It's from Hersbrucker Pure from Germany as the parent, and it's crossed with New Zealand males, and which have got the resulting progeny, if you like, from that cross is 2/3 of the genes are coming from the male side, the New Zealand genetics, and 1/3 coming from the Hersbrucker Pure. So, and of course, with the seedling population, you're getting a lolly scramble of different types. So, out of the thousands of plants you can produce, there's only going to be one or two that are ever going to be halfway decent to commercialise.
All right, so that's the genetics. Maybe we should flip around and talk about a little more terroir before we wrap up here. One of the interesting things that we kind of talked about earlier, you have microclimates, the Tapoera area and Motueka Valley have a number of farms, and those valleys hold, say, potentially more misty clouds, longer in the day. Down here, the upper Moultrie area, lots of heavier clay soils. It's a little different than some of the siltier soils and lighter soils further north in the Motueka area. So there are actually quite and then even within certain farms, we noticed at one of the farms in the Tapoera area, like you have, where the river has carved it out, it has left tiers along the way, and so you can drive along and look out at the top of the hop vines in this beautiful kind of view, but potentially even within the same farm, some different kinds of soil compositions,
no doubt.
Even though they are adjacent fields, and so this kind of there has to be some sort of impact of terroir, and farmers are also just
totally. And the farmers will say that the hops growing on these different soils within basically the climatic region is the same because they're in very close proximity, but on different soils, and they mature at different times, which is to a benefit to them, right? So then they can, one field they know is going to be maturing a little bit later than the other field, and that's principally soil based, and of course then it's going to be a soil by agronomics interaction, because the grower is not just going to stand back or not stand back, but treat both of these fields identically. They're going to be fertilizing them differently because the nutrient holding capacity of the silty soils is very different than the clay soils, and the water holding capacity. So like irrigation and fertilization are both kind of an interplay with the soil itself. But it does clearly have an effect, right? And
definitely, yeah. And also the Motueka region, for instance, is very near the coast, so it's quite unique environment, just the fact that it's very close to the sea, and versus Tapoera, which is 50 kilometres away from the sea. So as you say, in a valley, which can be sort of slightly climate different.
Right, things
sure.
are
It'd be
colder in the winter and warmer in the summer.
Yeah. More fluctuations, probably a bit more continental, I guess you could say. Right. If you can call it continental. But,
on this island.
But I mean, hops in New Zealand have been, it's very similar, in fact, to the Pacific Northwest in terms of age of the area, in terms of hop growing. It's getting close to 200 years that hops have been introduced into New Zealand. So, and while hops have been grown in many areas of New Zealand, the best area they found was no doubt the Nelson province. So there's hops grown south of here, and there's possibilities of growing them in other parts of New Zealand. But there's Nelson's always been the strong point of the industry, if you like, or the backbone of the industry, because its climate's good, and it's always it's good rain, falls all throughout the year. There's good sunshine, and the soil types are mainly free training. Mm-hmm. So they are the key ones, and so it's always been hop growing region, if you like, of New Zealand.
Sure. But interesting to see that, as the growers also do more work on this, they're able to help, by very thoughtfully planting, as you say, treating each of these fields with different soil types differently through the course of the growing season.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about
some
that.
different results out there and satisfy, both sides of that bell curve of brewer, those looking for one thing, those looking for another, and kind of help optimize for that, but also show, all these other things that are potentially possible just within that, genetic variety, but also finding some range in it. Are there any other factors, that you find impact here, Tom? Or did we cover them all there?
I think we've covered a lot of them. I mean, the other ones are kind of nuanced. It was interesting talking to growers as we've been touring about that. Some growers will use fertilization as a way to kind of control maturity to some degree. Like they fertilize later. They talk about allowing the hops to sort of hang in there longer, which I think they mean that they move into that final part of their maturity window.
Yeah, there is a bit of that
quickly.
done. Yeah, you're right.
So they can actually dial things into some degree by controlling nitrogen applications, which I thought was interesting. I haven't heard, and maybe the case also in North America, I just haven't heard North American growers talk about it in that regard. Like if I need to slow things down, I'll just put a little more nitrogen on.
And there's also a lot of organic matter put back on the hop composters. I guess they do it elsewhere in the world too, but there's a lot of that going on as well. So that influences the maturity dates of the harvest of each cultivar.
Yeah, because
they retain the nitrogen more.
Exactly, slow release of nitrogen as opposed to a more rapid release, like a foliar spray or.
Yeah. Anyway, let's wrap it up with a more of a big picture question. If you had some advice to share with brewers selecting and thinking about and rubbing and New Zealand hops, what are some of the best advice that you can give them for trying to understand range and think about flavors, build their own mental lexicon for thinking about these things, or even where to find different kind of outlier interesting things that may impact their brewing. Well, if you had a piece of advice to share with brewers out there, what would it be, Ron?
Come down and try our hops.
I agree with you. Definitely come down and check it out, because this is an experience.
That's the big advice I'd give them.
Sure.
But they're not going to experience like you two gentlemen. It's your first time to New Zealand, and I think unless you come down and experience it, you don't realise how much different and how impactful our cultivars could be on in terms of your brewing choices, if you like. And also, I think understanding the fact that we don't spray to an extent anyway. We don't use any kind of canopy sprays on our crop because of the disease-free nature. The only predator only insect we have is the two-spotted mite. So that's controlled by predators. So there's all those factors built into it as well. So the quality, I think, is improving every year. We're getting better and better at defining the good quality of our hops and making sure, as we've discussed, about the timing of harvest. And the growers are very knowledgeable guys, and they are really understanding the nuances of different aromas as well too. We spent a lot of time talking with them about the right picking windows. So that would. Yeah, I would say come down to New Zealand.
Sure.
And I would say, like, if you can't travel here, then to get a selection of New Zealand hop varieties. Like the prominent ones are Nelson Sauvin, Motueka, Riwaka.
Nectaron.
It's like a Nectaron Superdelic. The Taihiki is basically what the New Zealanders are, their term for Cascade. It's the same genetics as Cascade. That's kind of an interesting comparison to see. Then see what like a New Zealand Cascade. Other varieties that would be good in that set. It's like it's not a huge set. It doesn't have to be like 30 different varieties. But if you like look at like these 6 to 8 kind of core varieties, it'll give you a snapshot of like the aromatic similarity and differences that come from New Zealand.
We do roll our hops out at CBC every year, so or we have done the last 3 years anyway. So, and again at CBC in Indianapolis, there'll be hop selections going on. So that would be another way of embracing New Zealand hops, is to book a time slot and have a rub and a sniff of our hop cultivars there, if you haven't been able to get down to New Zealand. I know it's a long way away, but New Zealand, but the ultimate would be to come down here. But if you can't and you want to have some hop selections up in the US, come along to CBC and try them out.
Sure. Well, let's wrap it up right there. Thank you both for joining me. G&D Chillers builds with non-proprietary parts, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. Berkeley Yeast bioengineers ordinary strains to make them extraordinary. Try Old Orchard's R&D latest blends like fruit punch, guava, kiwi, and pomegranate. Taste the modern flavors of indie hops and 14 different beers poured at their CBC booth 3122. Upgrade your fermentation game with Unitank 2.0 from SS Brewtech. Isuzu trucks are the trucks you trust for the work you do. Sativa offers a comprehensive portfolio of laboratory filtration products, and SS Brewtech's Unitank 2.0 is engineered to help you get the most out of your fermentations. If you enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. We count on you to support our mission to bring you great information, perspectives, and tips, techniques, and whatnot from the world's best brewers and the scientists that also work to support the world's best brewers. Scientists like Dr. Ron and like Tom here. Thank you all for joining for the podcast. If people want to learn more about what you're doing these days, Ron, where do they find you?
They can find me at ron at nzhops.co.nz. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that people want to throw at me. And hopefully you've found this podcast of some interest about our hop cultivars and what happens here in New Zealand. We're very proud of what we do here.
Absolutely, as you should be. Tom, if people want to learn more about all the research that you do at Oregon State and whatnot, and your impact on the broader agricultural industry, where do they find you?
Yeah, I think if you just search Tom Shellhammer at Oregon State, you'll see like my webpage. It's got a list of all my publications. You've got to get a sense of what I do. It's a fairly unique name, right? So easily searchable.
Absolutely. Doing important work. And we should say that this research work that everyone has been doing has an incredible impact on the way that hop farmers and the agriculture of beer makes more efficient, better, tougher plants, more expressive plants. And, the research side of it is absolutely key to making the business side of it work. I know that we have some current trends in certain things that seem to maybe try to undermine the importance of government support and whatnot and educational support for research. But it's absolutely crucial as we see how important that research is for actually helping growers on the ground, on the fields, have more compelling hop varieties, more robust hop varieties, and to be able to run more efficient businesses that also allow brewers to be able to buy hops at a price that they can make beer at a price that consumers can also afford and enjoy. And so it all comes back to this kind of research to be more efficient, and yay science. That's how I'm going to end this episode. Thank you guys for joining me. As always, it's quite a pleasure to talk to you all. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks very much, Jen.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.